Okay, so for season 4, everyone always asks about tier set. Don't break your tier set until you get the new 4 set. Do not ever break your 4 set. It's way too good. For booleans and for trinkets, it'll depend. What you're going to want for sure are the rings. So you're definitely going to want these 2 rings. You're going to want Thorncaller's weapon. And then outside of that, it's just whatever. I would probably recommend getting the rings first just because they're much rarer to get. Unless you don't plan on mythic rating at all. If you don't plan on mythic rating at all, then maybe just get a Thorncallers. So once you get those 3, what trinkets are left? Well, you're 100% gonna want Dawn of Infinite trinket. This one is by far the best trinket in the game. It's my S tier trinket. I would highly recommend doing this on hard mode so that you can get it on hero track. Then after that, it's a choice of, do you want stuff to do damage or do you want stuff to live? If you want stuff to do damage, there's Stormcaller's boon, which I would highly not recommend, but you could use. It'll do a lot of AoE damage. If you happen to get all totem, this trinket is extremely good. It does a ton of damage, primarily AoE damage. Single target's kind of lackluster. It does give like a bunch of other stats too. Grief Torch will come in handy for specific dungeons, like if you're doing Brackenhide, it'll allow you to kill the totems. Anytime there's a huge prio target that needs to die instantly, Grief Torch is extremely good for that. However, you can't use Grief Torch most of the times. Like if you're just doing a trash pack AoE pull, Grief Torch is literally useless because you can't parry or dodge while you're casting Grief Torch and you're just gonna die. So you're only ever using this on bosses or on prio targets. This Enduring Dreadplates, they actually buffed, so it does do a lot of damage. It might be one of your better trinkets. Well, so here's how I classify it so far. I would say like Grief Torch is an A tier trinket. Boon is an F tier trinket. This is like a B tier trinket. Icon's pretty good too. I'll say it's like a B tier trinket. Then we've got Dreadplates. This is probably gonna be an A tier trinket too. It was doing a lot of damage on PTR. I am not sure if I will use this over other trinkets yet, but it's probably pretty high on the consideration. Chromatic Essence is looking to be the strongest stat stick that everyone's going to be using. So if everyone ends up using this, there's a high chance we as a tank will be using this as well to buff our teammates. So it could be possible that we use OCE plus Cheat Death Trinket. Anvil, I would generally not recommend using. There are like super niche scenarios where it could be good. It does really good single target damage if you can stack it up. Or like say Dawn of the Infinite hard mode, well, not hard mode, but the last boss, Eurodicron. That'd be like a great example of where this would be insane. But I would not recommend it otherwise. This sucks. This sucks. And Ward of Faceless Ire. This is another trinket that can be insanely useful. This is like a support trinket. It's useful for yourself and it's useful for shielding allies. There's going to be a lot of one-shots this season. You can use this to save your team. We've seen this used in the past whenever there's like crazy amounts of group damage. It basically makes you a mini paladin. Beacon, I would not use Beacon nowadays. Grief Torch is just a better version of Beacon. This is going to be like a B tier trinket. However, if it really comes down to it, there could be a possibility where you would want Beacon and Grief Torch so that you can completely destroy specific prio targets. Like again, Brackenhide Hollow, if you have no way of beating those totems, there is a possibility where you just play Beacon and Grief Torch so that you can rotate them to destroy the totems. Don't get this cape. This cape is complete trash, F tier. For this raid, there's Gift of the Ursine Vengeance. This one's okay. I would not recommend buying this with Boolean, but if you happen to get it, it's pretty decent. Probably a B tier trinket. Cataclysmic Brand is like the same as Anvil. I don't actually know which one's better between this and Anvil. Anvil might be better. I actually have no idea, but they serve the same purpose. I would only use it for very niche scenarios. And Augury and Rage Heart. I would not use Augury. There are better options nowadays. Rage Heart, I also probably wouldn't go for. It's good, but there are just better alternatives. Like again, I would probably rather use Faceless Ire, unless you like really care about your own survivability. Then this is like one of the better options. And there are also options in dungeons you can get too. So you can also go into Brackenhide Hollow. There's this trinket. It's extremely powerful defensiveness, but the problem with this trinket is that's all it does. All it does is it gives you a shield. So like I would use this over Barek's Rage Heart. But at the same time, I would probably just use a Faceless Ire so that you can at least help your team. Aside from that, there is also this trinket here from No Good. I haven't tried this trinket yet, but it did get buffed and it's a lot better now. The only problem with this trinket is it's a 2-minute cooldown. That's my only real gripe with it. Aside from that, it gives you primary stats and it's a shield that persists for much longer. So yeah, in short, cheat death 100%. And then you can just decide if you want something for prio damage, something for more AoE damage, like all totem, or something to help your team. It's up to you. In my opinion, I think most tanks should go for the more defensive value because in all the pug tanks I've encountered, I swear to God, I don't know what's wrong with you guys. You guys are like dying and like doing all sorts of weird stuff. Just play something defensive. As for stats are still the same. I mean, my stats are not good right now, but I'd recommend just getting really high haste, like close to 7,000, I would say. Really high crit, also close to 7,000. And then the rest into a mix of mastery and verse. Mastery is not that bad of a stat, and you're gonna have some mastery from the ring, for example. Getting this ring will give you a lot of mastery, same with slimy boots. And as for embellishments, I don't think embellishments really matter that much. They've nerfed embellishments a lot. It's kind of whatever. You could just get slimy boots. That's what I crafted first. There are also stuff you can get like elemental lariat, which is kind of useless right now because I don't have all my gems, but you could get this. I would also recommend, what was that? I think it was like conduit or something, the ones that buff your allies. But yeah, I mean, just don't worry too much about embellishments. Just craft whatever is a big upgrade for you. You can even just craft a weapon if you don't have a good weapon. And for talents, people always ask about talents. This is what I run baseline for the most part. There are many different builds. There's the Soul Cleave build, or no Soul Cleave build. Wait, yeah, Soul Cleave build, no Spirit Bomb build. You could play this. Problem with this build is it lacks self-healing because you're not Spirit Bombing as much. It's hard to get aggro on because you only hit 5 targets. And it just does less damage overall. But it does feel pretty good to play. It's much simpler. You can turn your brain off. It also provides a ton of single target tankiness. So you would probably run this build a little bit more on tyrannical weeks, especially if you're running into a specific wall. Say you're dying to Croft in Algafar's Academy, then you could consider playing Soul Cleave. But at the same time, it's kind of weird playing it in Algafar just because that's one of those dungeons where you kind of want Spirit Bomb so that you can get AoE aggro. Which leads to the no brand build, which is the one I talked about in my previous guide. This was the one I played a lot during PTR in season 3. You essentially drop not Spirit Bomb. You keep Spirit Bomb, but you drop Fire Demise and Burning Alive. This lets you get all the defensive options like extended spikes, feed the demon so that you have extremely high uptime on your spikes, and you keep Spirit Bomb for aggro and healing. This build, however, does Z DPS. The damage in this build is extremely bad. But, I mean, as a tank, your damage doesn't matter that much. Timers are extremely forgiving as long as you survive and as long as everyone else survives. You could play this build if you want. I might consider playing this build in some of the higher keys. We'll have to see. And then there's the cheat death build, which I probably recommend the least this season. Playing this build means that your single target tankiness is extremely low. It's the squishiest of these builds, but it does give you a safety net. It is pretty easy to play. It does okay damage because you still have the Fiery Brand talents and Spirit Bomb. The only dungeons I could see this ever really being played in is Brackenhide Hollow and Halls of Infusion, just because there aren't major tank busters and there aren't any scary bosses in either one of these dungeons. Well, I guess maybe the last boss of Halls of Infusion could be scary with the cheat death build, but for like all these other dungeons, on bosses specifically, you're gonna want to spam Soul Cleave a lot to stay alive. Like if you're ever wondering how do you stay alive on the bird boss, or how do you stay alive on the chain boss, or the last boss of No Good, first and last boss of Azure Vault, you gotta be spamming Soul Cleaves and keeping your frailty stacks high. But if you're playing the cheat death build, you can't do that. A build like this would be insanely good on those types of bosses. But yeah, so like for the most part, the flexible options are Ascending Flames and Calcified Spikes. Ascending Flames does have defensive value, but it's mostly for damage. Ascending Flames does mean when you have multiple Sigil of Flames up, you're healing for more because you leech way more, you're spawning way more souls, which means you're just way tankier. But it doesn't really help with single target tankiness. Calcified Spikes does help a lot in those situations. Whenever you're taking magic damage, Calcified Spikes, Bell Flame Fortification, and Demon Muzzle with high soul crush stacks is your go-to. That's how you survive big hits from bosses like first and last boss of Azure Vault. You gotta get a calcified spike going, make sure you have Immortal up, make sure you have Demon Muzzle up, and make sure you're soul cleaving a lot. That's the key to surviving those types of bosses. Then down here, dropping chains I would almost never recommend, but if you're not concerned about surviving, or if your only concern is surviving and you don't care about having utility, you could always go for extended spikes, but I almost never drop chains. Down here, you could also go Soulmonger. You lose a ton of single target if you don't go focus cleave, but Soulmonger does give you a little bit extra buffer for one-shotty scenarios. I would generally not recommend Soulmonger though, unless you know exactly what you're doing with it. And then there's Dark Glare Boon and Feed the Demon. The choice doesn't really matter too much. Feed the Demon does give you better mitigation for when you're tanking AoE packs. Like if you're tanking a lot of mobs, Feed the Demon is actually extremely good just because it provides a lot of extra parry, and Spikes is a really large defensive against melee attacks. But Dark Glare Boon would be better for bosses and would be better for large hitting magic attacks. So you could always go for Feed the Demon if you ever feel like you need it on fortified weeks, or if you're just like pulling really large, like Brackenhide Hollow for example. But yeah, those are like the main choices you would make in your talent tree. You could honestly play any of these builds. You could play this or that. You could play this or this. It's whatever. Just play whatever build you like. I've mostly just been playing this build for now because it does the highest damage and I don't really struggle surviving these keys currently. But I think that about covers everything. Alright, we're done with the video. Can you repeat all that? I'm gonna fucking ban you.